Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we are going to journey further into the freezing, pitch-black abyss of deep space than human consciousness has ever dared to venture. We are going to examine a terrifying anomaly occurring at the absolute edge of our reality, a discovery so profoundly unsettling that it violently shatters everything you thought you knew about the cosmos. For decades, we blindly believed that the void was empty, that our solar system was an open frontier blending seamlessly into the infinite dark. But tonight, we confront a chilling, undeniable truth. Voyager just detected a solid wall. We are investigating the invisible, crushing boundary of our solar system, a hyperdense cosmic barricade that proves space is not an empty ocean, but a violent, pressurized cage. We are going to peel back the comforting illusion of the limitless universe and force ourselves to look at the horrifying architecture of the cosmic quarantine zone that we are permanently trapped inside. To understand the sheer existential panic of this discovery, we must first look at the fragile, aging messenger that delivered the news. Launched in the late autumn of 1977, Voyager 1 is not a sleek, futuristic vessel. It is a primitive, spindly collection of Cold War-era aluminum, archaic copper wiring, and obsolete silicon processors. It is a fragile metal box possessing less computing power than the electronic key you use to unlock your front door. Yet it is currently drifting further into the terrifying abyss than any human-made object in the entire history of our civilization. It is our ultimate scout, our mechanical eyes blindly probing the deep dark. For nearly half a century, it has relentlessly hurled itself outward, flying past the colossal, swirling gas giants of our local neighborhood, leaving the comforting warmth of the sun far behind. Today, it is billions of miles away, suspended in a permanent, freezing twilight, where our star is nothing more than a faint, indistinguishable point of light, hopelessly lost in a sea of indifferent cosmic fire. The sheer isolation of Voyager is enough to break the human mind. When it speaks to us, whispering its data in faint radio waves, that signal must travel at the absolute speed of light for nearly a full day just to reach the massive listening antennas on Earth. It is a ghost ship, a freezing monument to human curiosity, carrying a golden phonograph record etched with the sounds of a vibrant biological world that the probe will never see again. Powered only by the slowly decaying, radioactive heat of a dying plutonium pellet, we sent this blind, robotic ambassador out into the great unknown, completely confident that we understood the environment it was sailing into. We arrogantly plotted its course, trusting our mathematical models and our localized physics, absolutely certain that the grand, sprawling theater of the universe was essentially an empty, quiet, and peaceful room. This unquestioned assumption, the illusion of the void, is the fundamental bedrock of human astronomy and the core of our psychological comfort. When we stand on the Earth and look up at the night sky, our biological hardware processes the staggering distances between the stars and naturally concludes that the space between them is absolute nothingness. We have spent our entire recorded history staring into the dark and defining it by its emptiness. We built a beautiful, deeply romanticized narrative that leaving the solar system would be a graceful, poetic transition. We believed that as Voyager traveled further and further away from the gravitational anchor of the sun, the local environment would simply fade out, becoming quieter, colder, and endlessly less dense. We imagined interstellar space as an infinite, frictionless ocean of absolute vacuum, a tranquil, glassy surface across which our metallic scout could peacefully glide for billions of years without ever feeling the slightest physical resistance. We took immense psychological comfort in the idea of an open universe, a boundless frontier completely free of physical barriers, where the only thing limiting our outward expansion was the agonizingly slow speed of our primitive chemical rockets. This illusion of an empty, passive void allowed us to feel a sense of majestic scale, convincing us that the universe was an open door, silently waiting for humanity to eventually cross the threshold and step out into the wider, interconnected galactic community. We assumed that the laws of physics, the behavior of radiation, and the density of space were uniform, stretching endlessly out into the dark in a predictable, comforting blanket of nothing. But the universe does not care about our romantic narratives, and it actively despises our assumptions. The cosmos is not a passive, empty stage, and it does not welcome biological life. At the absolute edge of our reality, at the invisible borderline where the familiar, protected territory of our solar system finally gives way to the true, unfiltered environment of the Milky Way galaxy, Voyager did not gracefully glide into a peaceful void. It did not experience a quiet, seamless fading of the solar winds. Instead, it crashed into something terrifying. As the aging, freezing probe crossed a theoretical mathematical threshold known as the heliopause, its primitive sensors registered an event that sent a shockwave of profound dread through the mission control rooms back on Earth. The transition was not seamless. It was a violent, chaotic, and completely terrifying collision. Voyager essentially hit a wall. According to the data bleeding back across billions of miles of empty space, the ambient temperature of the surrounding vacuum plummeted, but the density of the plasma in the environment violently, inexplicably spiked. The vacuum of space suddenly stopped being a vacuum. It became incredibly thick, heavy, and intensely pressurized. The probe did not slip into a quiet, frictionless ocean. It was the physical, cosmic equivalent of a fragile submarine leaving the calm, protected waters of a quiet harbor and violently smashing headfirst into a dense, crushing, and impenetrable wall of deep ocean water. The sensors detected a massive, staggering increase in the concentration of electrons and cosmic particles. The local space was no longer empty. It was aggressively pushing back against the spacecraft. To the highly sensitive instruments on board the metal box, this sudden, extreme shift in the physical medium felt like slamming into a solid, unyielding barricade. The void is not empty. It is heavily saturated with a hyper-compressed, highly energetic barrier of cosmic debris, ancient magnetic fields, and trapped, lethal radiation. This terrifying, invisible solid wall marks the absolute, unyielding boundary of our world. It violently dismantles the comforting illusion that our solar system is just a localized collection of planets freely floating in an open, empty galactic sea. Instead, it proves that we are existing inside a highly localized, heavily fortified quarantine zone. The space we live in is a fragile, pressurized bubble, continuously and relentlessly under siege by the unfathomable, crushing weight of the entire galaxy. The universe outside our solar system is not a peaceful, empty expanse waiting to be explored. It is a raging, hostile, and heavily saturated ocean of violent, energetic currents actively trying to crush its way in. As our dying, freezing scout pushes its way deeper into this claustrophobic barricade, struggling against the intense pressure of the interstellar medium, we are forced to reevaluate our entire existence. We are not the masters of an open, infinite frontier. We are incredibly vulnerable biological entities living deep inside a protected, artificial pocket of space. The invisible wall that Voyager just slammed into is the very edge of our reality, a dense, glowing cage of radiation that separates the calm, controlled physics of our localized neighborhood from the chaotic, apocalyptic nightmare of the true universe. We have spent our entire history dreaming of leaving the solar system, completely unaware that the exit is blocked. The door is heavily barricaded by a crushing, invisible force, leaving humanity to face the chilling, existential realization that we might be permanently trapped behind the wall, staring out into a dark, roaring cosmic ocean that we can never truly touch. To comprehend the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the invisible wall that Voyager crashed into, we must fundamentally erase the comforting, biological perception we have of our own star. When we stand on the surface of the Earth, shielded by a thick, blue atmospheric blanket, we look up and perceive the sun as a benevolent, life-giving orb. We associate it with warmth, daylight, and the gentle nourishment of biological ecosystems. But this is a spectacular, localized hallucination. If you strip away the protective filters of our planet and look at the sun through the cold, unforgiving lens of astrophysics, it is not a peaceful, glowing sphere. It is an actively detonating, violent nuclear engine of unimaginable destructive power. Deep within its crushing core, millions of tons of hydrogen are being violently fused into helium every single second, unleashing a chaotic, roaring inferno of raw, apocalyptic energy. This relentless nuclear detonation does not just produce the visible light that warms our skin, it aggressively exhales a massive, continuous, and terrifyingly fast hurricane of superheated radioactive plasma. This is the solar wind. It is not a gentle, ethereal breeze drifting through the vacuum. It is a torrential, explosive flood of highly charged subatomic particles, electrons, and protons, screaming outward from the sun's corona at speeds exceeding 1,000,000 miles per hour. It is a relentless, outward pressure, an active, violent exhalation from a star that is desperately trying to push the rest of the universe away. As this violent storm of radioactive solar plasma violently erupts in every conceivable direction, it acts as a colossal, cosmic snowplow. It aggressively sweeps through the immediate neighborhood of our solar system, pushing against the faint, ancient dust and the interstellar gases that drift through the dark. Because the sun's magnetic field is deeply embedded within this raging plasma, the solar wind effectively inflates a massive, invisible, and highly pressurized magnetic bubble around our entire stellar neighborhood. This staggering, cosmic structure is known as the Heliosphere. It is an architectural behemoth of plasma physics, a structure so unfathomably large that it completely dwarfs human comprehension. It effortlessly engulfs the scorching, rocky surface of Mercury, swallows the Earth, completely envelops the massive, swirling gas storms of Jupiter and Saturn, and stretches billions of miles past the frozen, dead plains of Pluto. The heliosphere is the absolute, unyielding dominion of the Sunday. Inside this colossal bubble, the environment is entirely dictated by the erratic, violent moods of our star. The solar wind bathes every single planet, every drifting asteroid, and every single frozen comet in a continuous, heavy wash of localized solar radiation, creating a distinct, pressurized microclimate in the middle of the pitch-black void. For decades, the global scientific establishment has proudly celebrated the existence of the heliosphere, painting it as the ultimate, heroic protector of human civilization. In the traditional, comforting narrative of modern astronomy, this massive magnetic bubble is our celestial armor. It is the impenetrable shield that actively deflects the vast majority of the lethal, high-energy cosmic rays that are constantly raining down from the violent, chaotic expanse of the Milky Way galaxy. We are told that without this invisible, pressurized barrier, the raw, unfiltered radiation from violently detonating supernovas and the crushing magnetic storms of deep space would violently sterilize the Earth, stripping away our fragile atmosphere and instantly obliterating any possibility of biological life. We have been conditioned to look at the heliosphere with a deep sense of psychological gratitude. We view it as a comforting, maternal embrace, a safe, warm pocket of space meticulously carved out of a hostile universe, allowing humanity to safely evolve, build cities, and look up at the stars without being instantly incinerated by their raw, radioactive fury. We believe that the bubble is our fortress. But tonight, we are going to violently invert that comforting perspective. We are going to strip away the illusion of safety and look at the heliosphere for what it truly is. When you closely examine the terrifying physics of a boundary that is dense enough to violently push back against the entire weight of the Milky Way, the concept of a protective shield morphs into something profoundly claustrophobic. The heliosphere is not a benevolent fortress. It is a rigid, unforgiving quarantine zone. We are not living in a free, open, and connected neighborhood of the cosmos. We are existing entirely inside a highly localized, fiercely controlled, and heavily pressurized physical tank. The sun has effectively locked us inside a massive, magnetic isolation ward, completely cutting us off from the true, unfiltered reality of the surrounding galaxy. The entire history of human civilization, every war, every technological triumph, and every single evolutionary mutation has occurred entirely within the suffocating confines of this solar terrarium. We are biological prisoners, completely enveloped by the thick, heavy exhalation of a single, localized star, blindly floating through an ocean we cannot even truly perceive. This terrifying realization violently dismantles the very foundation of human knowledge. We have spent centuries proudly constructing the towering, magnificent intellectual cathedral of modern science. We meticulously measured the behavior of subatomic particles. We calculated the density of the vacuum, and we confidently mapped the intricate behavior of electromagnetic radiation. We launched brilliant metal telescopes into orbit, assuming they were giving us a clear, unobstructed view of reality. But the horrifying truth is that everything we know, every single equation, every law of physics, and every assumption we have ever made about the nature of space was learned from inside the pressurized tank. We are like bizarre, blind, deep-sea creatures born entirely within the suffocating, superheated water of a localized volcanic vent at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Because these creatures have never left the vent, they arrogantly build their entire understanding of physics around the assumption that the entire global ocean is composed of boiling, mineral-rich water. They have absolutely no concept of the freezing, crushing, pitch-black reality of the true abyss that surrounds them. Humanity is suffering from the exact same catastrophic, localized delusion. The space that we have explored, the vacuum that our astronauts have floated in, and the environment that our most advanced satellites have measured is not the actual universe. It is a highly contaminated, artificially pressurized, and heavily filtered simulation of space, completely dictated by the localized solar wind of our specific star. We have never actually tasted the true, raw, and terrifying universe. We have never physically measured the undisturbed, ancient plasma of the interstellar medium. We have never felt the true, unfiltered bite of a galactic magnetic field. The reality of the cosmos has been deliberately hidden from us, masked by the overwhelming, deafening roar of our own Sunday. The heliosphere is a biological lie, a massive, invisible wall of solar interference that tricks us into believing we understand the environment we are living in. When Voyager finally reached the absolute edge of this massive, invisible structure, it was not simply leaving the neighborhood. It was forcefully breaching the heavy, thick wall of the quarantine zone. It was violently piercing the localized membrane of our physical reality, attempting to push its way out of the only environment our species has ever known. The sudden, terrifying spike in density it recorded was the violent, physical proof that our physics are localized and incomplete, that our understanding of space is desperately flawed, and that the universe outside our little, pressurized bubble is fundamentally, horrifyingly different from anything we have ever experienced. We are not the proud masters of the cosmos, bravely looking out into an open, empty sea. We are hopelessly quarantined subjects, permanently sealed inside a pressurized magnetic cage, completely ignorant of the deafening, radioactive reality of the true universe that is actively, aggressively crushing against the invisible walls of our localized prison. For 35 years, Voyager 1 hurled itself outward, a fragile metal spear thrown blindly into the absolute dark. It carried the arrogant, unquestioned assumptions of a biological species that had never actually left its own protective cradle. The astrophysicists, sitting in the brightly lit, sterile control rooms on Earth, had meticulously charted its trajectory, building complex, elegant mathematical models that confidently predicted a slow, silent fading of the solar winds. We imagined the extreme boundary of our solar system not as a violent physical barrier, but as a gentle, gradient slope. We believed that the outward, pressurized breath of the sun would simply dissipate, growing thinner, weaker, and more exhausted until it quietly surrendered to the infinite, frictionless vacuum of interstellar space. The transition was supposed to be completely seamless, a peaceful, poetic slipping away into the deep cosmic ocean where the laws of physics remained familiar, only colder and vastly emptier. We expected our metallic Sentinel to glide effortlessly into a void defined entirely by its absolute lack of substance. But the universe is not elegant. It does not operate on the comforting, localized models engineered by human minds, and it actively despises our assumptions. As Voyager finally approached the theoretical limit of our star's dominion, a violent threshold known as the heliopause, the surrounding environment began to fundamentally break down. This is the absolute edge of the magnetic bubble, the exact cosmic coordinate where the violent, million-mile-per-hour solar wind finally exhausts its forward momentum and crashes headlong into the ancient, unfathomable currents of the Milky Way galaxy. For months leading up to the crossing, the archaic, fading sensors aboard the spacecraft began to register deeply unsettling, chaotic fluctuations. The familiar solar particles that had steadily bathed the probe for decades began to violently stagnate, swirling in unpredictable, turbulent eddies as if they were backing up against a massive, invisible dam. The quiet, predictable outward flow of our localized reality was choking. Yet, even as the solar wind began to collapse and die, the scientific establishment on Earth still fiercely clung to the illusion of an empty void waiting just beyond the threshold. They waited for the final, exhausted gasp of the sun, fully expecting the density of the surrounding space to simply drop to absolute zero. And then, in the late summer of 2012, the transition occurred. It was not a quiet fading. It was a violent, structural collision that permanently shattered our understanding of the cosmic architecture. As Voyager 1 pierced the final, shivering membrane of the heliopause and physically exited the protective quarantine zone of the solar system, its instruments registered a catastrophic environmental anomaly. The data bleeding back to Earth through the deep space network looked less like a graceful celestial transition and more like a terrifying, localized glitch in the fundamental fabric of reality. First came the thermal collapse. The ambient temperature of the surrounding plasma, the residual, comforting heat generated by the chaotic solar wind, instantly and violently plummeted. The spacecraft was suddenly plunged into an abyssal, freezing nightmare, encountering temperatures far colder than anything it had ever measured within the sun's protective sphere. The localized warmth of our world was brutally extinguished, entirely replaced by the ancient, freezing apathy of the interstellar void. But the sudden, agonizing drop in temperature was not the horror that paralyzed the global scientific community. The true, existential nightmare was revealed in the density readings. According to the foundational assumptions of human astronomy, as a spacecraft leaves the solar system and enters the true vacuum of deep space, the density of the surrounding matter should logically plummet. Space is, by our own biological definition, supposed to be empty, but as Voyager crossed the absolute boundary, the plasma density did not drop. It violently, inexplicably spiked. It surged to levels that were mathematically impossible within the comforting confines of our localized physics. The archaic instruments on the dying probe registered a surrounding environment that was suddenly incredibly dense, reading a concentration of plasma that was nearly 40 to 80 times thicker than the space it had just left. The vacuum was no longer a vacuum. It was incredibly thick, heavily saturated, and intensely pressurized. The metal hull of the spacecraft was suddenly grinding against a massive, localized concentration of ionized cosmic matter, ancient electrons, and primordial cosmic rays that had been violently piling up against the outside of our solar bubble for billions of years. The sheer physical weight of this discovery is suffocating. Voyager had not sailed into an open, empty sea. It had crashed headfirst into a cosmic barricade. The space immediately outside our solar system is not a frictionless void of nothingness. It is a highly compressed, heavily irradiated wall of interstellar plasma. Imagine the sheer, terrifying mechanical force of a hyperdense barrier constructed entirely of crushed, vibrating quantum matter, pushing back with the unimaginable weight of the entire Milky Way galaxy. The density spike was so sudden, so incredibly sharp, that it registered on the probe's ancient equipment like a physical impact. The electrons in the interstellar medium were vibrating at a drastically higher frequency, producing a thicker, heavier, and completely alien physical environment. Our mechanical scout was suddenly suffocating in a thick, cosmic sludge, a dense soup of violent radiation that had been violently stopped in its tracks by the outward pressure of the sun, compressing into a glowing, invisible wall of raw, localized destruction. To truly visualize the terrifying physical reality of this crossing, you must completely abandon the romanticized image of a spaceship gracefully gliding through a silent canopy of stars. Instead, picture a fragile, pressurized submarine navigating the calm, shallow, and highly controlled waters of a protected, man-made harbor. Inside the harbor, the water is entirely predictable, the pressure is easily manageable, and the vessel moves with graceful, effortless ease. But the exact moment the submarine crosses the concrete harbor wall and ventures out into the open ocean, it does not find an empty, weightless void. It violently smashes into a dense, crushing, and overwhelmingly heavy wall of deep ocean water, instantly subjected to the terrifying, physical pressure of a boundless, hostile abyss. The water outside the harbor is fundamentally thicker, more violent, and actively trying to crush the hull of the intruding vessel. This is exactly what happened to Voyager at the edge of our reality. It left the calm, thin, localized plasma of the solar wind and violently collided with the crushing, heavy, and intensely dense plasma of the true universe. The transition was a brutal physical shock to the system. It proved, with cold, empirical, mathematical certainty, that the void we have been blindly staring into for our entire history is a spectacular, biological lie. The space between the stars is not empty. It is not a quiet, frictionless highway waiting to be explored by human astronauts. It is thick, it is heavy, and it is intensely, terrifyingly physical. The void is heavily occupied, completely saturated with a crushing cosmic weight that actively barricades the exit to our world. When Voyager breached the membrane, it did not find freedom. It found a physical wall of compressed interstellar fury, reminding us that we are a quarantined species, permanently trapped behind a dense, invisible boundary of physical matter that violently refuses to let us out into the dark. The violent density spike recorded by Voyager as it pierced the absolute edge of our reality was not a mere sensor malfunction, nor was it a localized, temporary glitch in the fabric of the void. It was the physical, undeniable manifestation of a colossal cosmic collision. To truly understand what this fragile, aging metal probe actually slammed into, we must zoom out and observe the terrifying, macroscopic war that is constantly raging at the invisible borders of our world. The boundary of our solar system is not a peaceful, quiet frontier slowly fading into an empty abyss. It is an active, hyper-violent battleground. For billions of years, our sun has been desperately exhaling its superheated solar wind, violently inflating the protective magnetic bubble we call the heliosphere. But this localized expansion does not happen in an empty, frictionless vacuum. It happens deep inside the Milky Way galaxy, an unfathomably massive, rotating architectural behemoth filled with its own ancient, rushing currents of interstellar matter. As our entire solar system hurtles through the local galactic arm at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour, the outward, pressurized breath of our star violently clashes against the incoming, relentless tide of the interstellar medium. It is an apocalyptic, eternal standoff between the localized power of one single star and the crushing, infinite weight of the rest of the galaxy. Where these two unimaginable cosmic forces violently collide, the unforgiving laws of fluid dynamics dictate a horrifying physical reality. The interstellar medium is not empty space. It is a raging, invisible river of ancient plasma, lethal cosmic rays, and primordial gas that has been drifting through the dark since the dawn of time. As this galactic flood slams into the outward pressure of the sun's magnetic shield, it abruptly decelerates. It violently chokes. Think of a massive, roaring river suddenly smashing into an immovable, invisible stone pillar. The rushing water does not simply vanish into nothingness. It aggressively piles up, swirling in chaotic, high-pressure eddies, creating a dense, turbulent wall of compressed fluid. This is exactly what is happening at the absolute edge of our world, but on a scale that entirely shatters human comprehension. The interstellar matter is physically backing up against the outside of our bubble, creating a staggering, cosmic traffic jam of crushed debris that stretches for billions of miles across the dark. The primary architect of this terrifying, invisible barricade is the most abundant element in the universe, hydrogen. But these are not the ionized, magnetically charged particles of the solar wind that we are familiar with. A massive portion of the deep interstellar medium consists of cold, neutral hydrogen atoms. Because they completely lack an electrical charge, these ancient atoms are entirely immune to the invisible, magnetic shielding of the heliosphere. They drift through the freezing deep dark, completely ignoring the magnetic battle lines, ghosting straight toward our solar system like silent, invisible torpedoes. For a brief moment, it seems as though they will effortlessly pierce our protective bubble and flood the inner solar system. But as they finally breach the outer, turbulent layers of the collision zone, they plunge directly into the chaotic, boiling plasma where the solar wind is violently dying. In this highly pressurized, superheated environment, a terrifying quantum transaction occurs. The incoming neutral interstellar hydrogen violently collides with the charged solar particles that are frantically pushing outward, exchanging electrons in a rapid, microscopic frenzy of subatomic violence. This violent charge exchange instantly gives the incoming neutral atoms a magnetic charge, brutally stripping them of their immunity and instantly subjecting them to the chaotic, swirling magnetic forces of the boundary layer. The exact moment these ancient hydrogen atoms become charged, they are violently stopped in their tracks. They are caught in the cosmic snare. Stripped of their neutrality, they can no longer effortlessly penetrate the protective bubble of the solar system. But the relentless, crushing tide of the Milky Way galaxy keeps pushing from behind, forcing more and more hydrogen into the exact same localized region of space. The result is a massive, hyper-dense accumulation of matter, literally piling up against the outside of our world. Astrophysicists call this terrifying, physical structure the hydrogen wall. It is a vast, towering barrier of super-compressed, incredibly dense atomic matter wrapped tightly around the leading edge of the heliosphere like a suffocating blanket. It is not a theoretical line on a star chart. It is a thick, heavy, and intensely physical region of trapped cosmic debris. It is so thick and so heavily saturated with violently interacting particles that it actually generates a faint, eerie ultraviolet glow. If human eyes were naturally equipped to see in the extreme ultraviolet spectrum, we would look out into the supposed empty, black night sky and see a massive, terrifying wall of glowing, radioactive fire looming just beyond the orbit of Pluto. We would see a localized, burning inferno that physically marks the absolute, unyielding limits of our cage. The existence of the hydrogen wall forces humanity to confront a deeply unsettling, intensely claustrophobic reality about our physical place in the cosmos. We are not peacefully sailing through an open, welcoming void. We are under active, relentless siege. The sheer, physical weight of the hydrogen wall represents the unfathomable mass of the Milky Way galaxy actively pushing back against our localized existence. The universe is entirely hostile, and it is aggressively trying to crush our protective bubble. The intense, terrifying plasma density spike that Voyager recorded was not a mathematical anomaly. It was the visceral, physical sensation of the spacecraft violently grinding against this colossal, compressed mass. The fragile metal probe did not gracefully slip out of the solar system and float free. It had to physically, violently punch its way through a highly pressurized wall of trapped cosmic sludge. It was forced to drag its primitive, aging chassis through a hyperdense barricade of ancient hydrogen, violently slowed by the sheer physical friction of a galaxy that absolutely does not want to let us out into the dark. This changes everything we understand about the concept of deep space exploration. We have spent decades looking at beautiful, high-resolution photographs of distant nebulas, sparkling star clusters, and swirling galaxies, completely unaware that we are viewing them through the distorted, heavy, and highly irradiated lens of our own localized prison wall. We are biological entities permanently trapped inside a fragile, pressurized bubble, heavily surrounded by a thick, crushing layer of crushed interstellar gas. The immense, terrifying weight of the galaxy is constantly, endlessly pressing against this wall, threatening to collapse our magnetic shield and drown our entire solar system in a lethal, sterilizing flood of cosmic radiation. When Voyager finally breached this boundary, fighting through the thick density of the hydrogen wall, it provided the ultimate, horrifying proof that the universe outside is not an empty, welcoming expanse. It is a dense, physical, and violently aggressive ocean. Our solar system is nothing more than a tiny, heavily barricaded submarine, desperately trying to hold back the crushing weight of the absolute abyss. The hydrogen wall is there, it is dense, it is intensely real, and it firmly guarantees that our biological quarantine from the rest of the universe is absolute. As Voyager 1 dragged its battered, freezing chassis through the hyperdense sludge of the hydrogen wall, the scientists sitting in the sterile mission control rooms back on Earth desperately hoped that the worst of the transition was finally over. They prayed that, having violently punched through the highly pressurized collision zone of ancient cosmic debris, the aging metal scout would finally slip into the quiet, undisturbed expanse of the true interstellar ocean. They anticipated a return to mathematical elegance, expecting the probe's ancient instruments to register the calm, uniform, and indifferent background hum of the Milky Way galaxy. But the universe is a master of claustrophobic horror, and it had meticulously prepared another, even more terrifying layer to our cosmic prison. As the spacecraft pushed its primitive magnetometer out into the raw abyss, attempting to read the invisible, magnetic architecture of deep space, it did not find an open, flowing current. Instead, it detected a horrifying, structural anomaly that violently redefines our entire existence. It discovered that the interstellar magnetic fields do not simply wash past our solar system. They do not ignore us. They are draped over us. To fully internalize the sheer, existential dread of this discovery, we must first understand the true, terrifying nature of a galactic magnetic field. When we look up at the spiraling, majestic arms of the Milky Way, our biological eyes are only capable of registering the glowing, superficial starlight. We cannot see the colossal, invisible nervous system that binds the entire galaxy together. For billions of years, the violent, chaotic deaths of hypermassive stars, the relentless spinning of neutron pulsars, and the swirling, superheated plasma of the galactic core have been aggressively weaving a massive, interconnected web of magnetic force. These invisible lines of magnetic tension stretch across hundreds of thousands of light years, acting as a raging, torrential river of cosmic energy that dictates the flow of interstellar matter and lethal radiation. In our naive, localized arrogance, we implicitly assumed that our tiny, insignificant solar system was merely a microscopic pebble sitting at the bottom of this vast, flowing river. We believed that the ancient magnetic currents of the galaxy would simply flow straight through our local space, completely undisturbed and entirely apathetic to the existence of our protective solar bubble. We thought we were transparent to the forces of the deep dark. But the relentless, empirical data bleeding back from Voyager's fading sensors completely annihilated that comforting assumption. As the probe measured the angle and the intensity of the galactic magnetic field lines existing just outside the heliopause, it found something mathematically impossible based on our previous localized physics. The lines were not pointing in the uniform, straight direction of the galactic arm. They were violently distorted. They were bending. The mathematics revealed a horrifying architectural reality. As the immense, heavy currents of the interstellar magnetic field smash into the outward pressure of our solar system, they do not pierce the bubble. They do not pass through us. Instead, they are violently forced to stretch, bend, and wrap around the curved exterior of the heliosphere. Like a colossal, invisible net catching a boulder in a raging apocalyptic flood, the magnetic lines of the Milky Way are actively snagging on the absolute edge of our world. They are sliding over the surface of our quarantine zone, stretching and conforming to the exact shape of our localized prison. This is the draping effect. It is the terrifying, physical reality that our solar system is completely wrapped inside a massive, tightly woven shroud of ancient cosmic energy. This is not a gentle, passive embrace. In the unforgiving laws of astrophysics, magnetic field lines behave exactly like massive, invisible rubber bands. When they are forcefully stretched and bent out of their natural alignment, they store a terrifying amount of kinetic tension. They desperately want to snap back into a straight line. Because the galactic magnetic field is currently draped over the massive spherical exterior of our heliosphere, it is constantly, relentlessly, trying to straighten itself out. This generates a staggering, crushing inward pressure. The invisible net is pulling tight. The Milky Way galaxy is actively squeezing the outside of our solar bubble, applying a suffocating, immense magnetic tension that aggressively compacts the already hyperdense plasma of the hydrogen wall. We are not just blocked by a wall of physical cosmic debris, we are tightly bound and sealed by the fundamental magnetic architecture of the cosmos. The universe has literally thrown a heavy, suffocating blanket over our entire localized reality, violently suppressing the outward breath of our sun and completely isolating us in the dark. The philosophical and existential implications of this magnetic shroud are absolutely paralyzing. We have spent centuries looking up at the night sky, completely convinced that we are an integral, connected part of the grand galactic machinery. We believed that the energy, the matter, and the fundamental forces of the Milky Way flowed freely through our world, connecting the atoms in our bodies to the distant, burning stars. But the draping effect proves that we are entirely severed from the true universe. We are living inside a hermetically sealed, magnetically quarantined bubble. The chaotic, raging currents of the galaxy, the spectacular magnetic storms of the deep void, and the raw, unfiltered physical reality of the interstellar medium are actively kept out, bouncing off the suffocating shroud that wraps our world. But the true, horrifying duality of a quarantine zone is that a barrier designed to keep the outside world from getting in is equally efficient at keeping the prisoner from getting out. We are wrapped in a cosmic straitjacket. The magnetic shroud physicalizes our profound isolation, proving that the boundary of our solar system is not just a fading of the solar wind, but a complex, heavily fortified, and multi-layered barricade. First, we must fight the sudden, crushing density spike of the true vacuum. Then, we must physically punch through the hyperdense, glowing sludge of the hydrogen wall. And finally, even if a human vessel could somehow survive that apocalyptic collision, it would find itself hopelessly tangled in the massive, invisible web of the draped galactic magnetic field, fighting against a crushing inward tension that is powered by the unfathomable weight of the entire Milky Way. We are a severed, isolated biological experiment, tucked away in a dark, quiet corner of the galaxy, completely enveloped in a tight, suffocating shroud. We are floating blindly in the dark, absolutely cut off from the true, terrifying wonders of the cosmos, permanently locked inside a localized cage that the universe has meticulously, magnetically sealed shut. Let us deeply consider what this means for the very light that reaches our eyes. When you stare into the night sky, you see the brilliant, piercing glow of Sirius, the hazy, distant smear of the Andromeda Galaxy, and the majestic, swirling dust lanes of the Milky Way. We trust this light. We believe it gives us a clear, unobstructed window into the infinite cosmos. But the discovery of the magnetic shroud violently warps this comforting perception. The light from those distant, ancient stars must first travel through the raw, violent currents of the interstellar medium, entirely governed by the massive, shifting architecture of the galactic magnetic field. But before that light can finally reach the optical lenses of our telescopes or the biological receptors in our human eyes, it must violently plunge through the draping effect. It must pass through the tightly wound, super-compressed magnetic net that is actively squeezing our world. We are not looking out through a clear, open window. We are desperately trying to peer through the heavy, distorted, and intensely pressurized threads of a cosmic blindfold. Every single observation we have ever made about the deep universe has been filtered through the suffocating tension of this invisible shroud, leaving us to eternally question whether the universe we see is the true reality, or simply a distorted, quarantined hallucination projected onto the inside of our magnetic cage. The sheer scale of this isolation is enough to break the human spirit. Voyager 1, our bravest and most primitive mechanical scout, was completely blind to this reality until it physically slammed into the barrier. It had no warning that the magnetic environment of the galaxy would suddenly curve and wrap around it. It simply pushed outward, blindly fulfilling its programming, only to discover that the open ocean it was promised was actually a tightly sealed, heavily armored vault. The realization that the interstellar magnetic field does not simply exist out there in the void, but is actively, physically interacting with the absolute boundary of our home, forces us to accept our profound insignificance. The Milky Way galaxy is not a passive backdrop to human history. It is a massive, aggressive, and highly organized physical structure that actively dictates the limits of our existence. It has thrown a net over our star, wrapping the Earth, the Sun, and all the wandering planets in a tight, impenetrable embrace. We are caught in the web, permanently isolated from the chaotic, raging currents of the deep dark, completely unaware of the true, terrifying majesty of the universe that is actively, relentlessly squeezing the absolute edge of our reality. To comprehend the absolute, paralyzing terror of our existence within the cosmos, we must completely shatter the most persistent and dangerous biological delusion humanity has ever entertained: the belief that space is a quiet, empty, and peaceful void. When we look through our telescopes at the silent, majestic dance of the planets, or when we marvel at the high-resolution images of frozen moons and dusty Martian landscapes captured by our localized rovers, we are profoundly deceived. We see a tranquil, almost serene environment, governed by the predictable, clockwork laws of orbital mechanics. We imagine that if we were to simply float away from the Earth, we would be enveloped in a cold, silent, and deeply peaceful emptiness. But this tranquility is a spectacular, localized lie. It is the artificial peace of a heavily fortified quarantine zone. The silence we perceive is merely the result of the deafening roar of the true universe being actively, violently blocked by the invisible, magnetic walls of the heliosphere. When Voyager finally dragged its battered chassis through the hyperdense sludge of the hydrogen wall and pierced the magnetic shroud, it did not emerge into a quiet, frictionless abyss. It broke through the surface of our protected harbor and was instantly plunged into a raging, apocalyptic ocean of fire. Interstellar space is entirely falsely named as a vacuum. To call it empty is a failure of human language and a fundamental misunderstanding of cosmic physics. The reality outside our solar bubble is a hypercharged, violently active theater of raw, unfiltered destruction. It is a lethal, radioactive ocean overflowing with high-energy cosmic rays, ancient subatomic shrapnel, and roaring interstellar winds that have been violently churning since the dawn of time. When you step outside the protective dominion of our Sun, you are entirely exposed to the overarching, catastrophic violence of the Milky Way galaxy. For billions of years, across the sprawling, 100,000 light-year expanse of our galactic neighborhood, hypermassive stars have lived short, furious lives before dying in violently unimaginable explosions. These supernovas and hypernovas do not just produce a brief flash of light, they physically tear themselves apart, aggressively hurling their superheated, crushed internal organs out into the deep dark. The remnants of these shattered stars, atomic nuclei completely violently stripped of their electrons, are accelerated by the shock waves of their own destruction to speeds approaching the absolute limit of light. These are galactic cosmic rays, and they are the apex predators of the deep void. They are microscopic, subatomic bullets possessing a terrifying amount of kinetic energy, relentlessly crisscrossing the galaxy in a chaotic, never-ending storm. Inside our solar system, the Sun's magnetic bubble acts as a colossal, invisible shield, actively deflecting the vast majority of these lethal, high-speed projectiles away from the inner planets. The solar wind acts as a dense, outward-flowing current that forces the cosmic radiation to violently detour around our world. But outside the bubble, in the true, unfiltered reality of the interstellar medium, there is no shield. There is no dampening field. The baseline energy of the environment is magnitudes higher than anything we have ever experienced or can even artificially replicate on Earth. It is a continuous, deafening, radioactive storm that never ceases, never slows, and absolutely never forgives. If a human being were to somehow step outside a spacecraft in the true vacuum of interstellar space without the massive, localized protection of a star's magnetic field, they would not simply freeze to death in the cold dark. The ambient, lethal radiation of the galactic ocean would instantly, violently tear through their spacesuit, systematically and subatomically disassembling their biological tissue by shattering the very chemical bonds that hold their DNA together. The ancient plasma that drifts between the stars is not a passive, inert gas. It is a highly energetic, lethally charged fluid that is constantly being whipped and churned by the massive, invisible magnetic architecture of the galaxy. It forms towering, turbulent interstellar winds that rush through the dark at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour, carrying the radioactive ashes of dead stars and the crushing kinetic force of a completely hostile universe. We are floating blindly in the middle of a cosmic hurricane, completely oblivious to the apocalyptic forces raging just beyond our borders, simply because we happen to be sitting inside the incredibly fragile, localized eye of the storm. The heliosphere is the only thing separating the quiet, biological oasis of the Earth from the violent, sterilizing fury of the galactic ocean. This brings us to the ultimate, existential nightmare of our profound vulnerability. We treat the heliosphere as if it were a permanent, indestructible fixture of reality, a solid wall of iron guaranteeing our eternal safety. But it is not solid. It is a trembling, invisible, and highly unstable membrane of localized plasma and magnetism, and its existence is entirely dependent on the continuous, unbroken mechanical effort of a single, chaotic star. The Sun is not a perfect, uniform machine. It is a volatile, churning nuclear engine whose output fluctuates violently over time. Its magnetic field constantly shifts, its solar winds surge and wane, and its ability to push back against the crushing weight of the Milky Way is in a constant state of agonizing flux. The bubble is not a static sphere. It expands and contracts, heavily panting and shivering against the relentless, inward pressure of the interstellar medium. We are entirely at the mercy of cosmic weather we cannot control and barely understand. Imagine, for one terrifying moment, the apocalyptic consequences if the sun's internal magnetic dynamo were to suddenly stutter, or if our solar system were to blindly drift into a region of the Milky Way where the interstellar ocean was simply too dense, too heavy, and too violently pressurized for the solar wind to hold back. Imagine the absolute, paralyzing horror if the massive, protective bubble of the heliosphere were to suddenly collapse or simply pop. The cascade of catastrophic events would not take millions of years to unfold. The destruction of our entire localized reality would be incredibly rapid and violently absolute. Without the immense outward pressure of the solar wind, the full, unfiltered fury of the galactic ocean would instantly crash over the boundaries of the solar system like a colossal, invisible tsunami. The raging interstellar winds, carrying lethal, suffocating doses of ionizing radiation and hyper-accelerated cosmic shrapnel, would flood the inner planets. When this apocalyptic wave of galactic fire finally slammed into the Earth, our planet's own tiny, localized magnetic field, the fragile magnetosphere that protects us from everyday solar flares, would be violently, instantly overwhelmed and crushed into nothingness. There would be absolutely no resistance. With our magnetic defenses completely stripped away, the true vacuum of the cosmos would physically interact with our world for the first time in billions of years. The Earth's atmosphere, the delicate, pressurized blue shell of nitrogen and oxygen that allows us to breathe and keeps the oceans from boiling into space, would be brutally ignited by the sheer kinetic friction of the cosmic rays. It would be physically torn from the surface of the planet, violently stripped away and blown out into the dark, trailing behind the Earth like the fading tail of a dying comet. In a matter of hours, the surface pressure of the planet would violently drop to zero. The majestic, sprawling oceans that cover our world would instantly, explosively boil, vaporizing into the newly formed, irradiated vacuum. Every single biological organism on the face of the Earth, from the towering ancient forests to the deepest trench bacteria, and every single one of the billions of human beings blindly going about their daily lives, would be simultaneously, flawlessly sterilized by a blinding flash of cosmic radiation. The radiation would be so intensely powerful, so completely absolute, that it would literally cook the cellular structure of all organic matter, instantly reducing the entire, grand narrative of human history. All of our art, our wars, our love, and our towering concrete cities to a silent layer of irradiated, sterile ash. The Earth would be violently transformed from a vibrant, incredibly rare biological oasis into a charred, dead, and deeply irradiated rock, entirely indistinguishable from the countless billions of other silent, sterilized worlds drifting blindly through the apathetic dark. We are living entirely on borrowed time, completely and helplessly dependent on an invisible, shivering wall of localized magnetism to hold back an infinite ocean of atomic fire. We are not safe. We are fragile, biological anomalies precariously perched inside a cosmic pressure cooker, existing purely by the grace of a single, localized star desperately, violently pushing back against the abyss. The crushing weight of the galaxy is actively trying to drown us, and the invisible boundary that Voyager just violently slammed into is the very last, and the only thing, keeping us from burning. To truly comprehend the fragile, precarious nature of our existence, we must now completely shatter the architectural illusion of the cosmic quarantine zone itself. When we conceptualize the massive magnetic bubble of the heliosphere, our human brains, desperate for order and geometric perfection, naturally visualize a pristine, flawless sphere. We imagine the sun sitting exactly in the center of a perfectly round, impenetrable globe of magnetic force, projecting its protective barrier equally in all directions against the freezing dark. This spherical hallucination is incredibly comforting because it implies absolute stability. It suggests that our localized physical reality is a well-engineered, static fortress, evenly pushing back the crushing, radioactive weight of the Milky Way galaxy with absolute mathematical precision. We assume that the distance between the Earth and the terrifying apocalyptic fire of the true vacuum is a constant fixed variable. But the universe does not respect human geometry, and the deep cosmos is an environment defined entirely by chaotic, unequal violence. The final, horrifying truth about the invisible wall that keeps us safe is that it is fundamentally broken. It is a deformed, violently asymmetrical structure, and the terrifying proof of its deformity was delivered by the twin brother of our original mechanical scout. While Voyager 1 was hurled blindly toward the northern hemisphere of the cosmic dark, violently punching through the plasma spike of the heliopause in 2012, NASA had simultaneously sent Voyager 2 on an entirely different trajectory. Launched just weeks apart in the late 1970s, the second fragile metal box was programmed to dive deep into the southern expanse of the solar system. For decades, it flawlessly mirrored the silent, freezing journey of its twin, drifting billions of miles away from the sun, coasting through the exact same supposedly frictionless void. If the heliosphere were truly a perfect, stable, and static sphere of magnetic force, then Voyager 2, traveling at a known velocity, should have crossed the absolute boundary of our world at the exact same relative distance from the Sun as Voyager 1. The mathematics of our localized models demanded that the architecture of our quarantine zone be perfectly symmetrical. The invisible wall should have been exactly where we predicted it would be. But when the archaic sensors of Voyager 2 finally registered the sudden, terrifying plunge in temperature and the massive, suffocating spike in plasma density that marks the violent crossing of the threshold, the data completely defied our models. The second probe did not hit the wall at the same distance. It smashed into the highly pressurized cosmic barricade nearly 1.5 billion miles closer to the Sun than its northern twin. This monumental, staggering discrepancy violently dismantles the illusion of a perfect, stable quarantine zone. The boundary of our reality is not a pristine, elegant sphere. It is jagged. It is deeply deformed. It is a violently asymmetrical, lopsided membrane of magnetic tension that is being brutally crushed and warped by the unequal forces of the surrounding galaxy. On one side of the solar system, the Sun's outward breath manages to push the terrifying weight of the interstellar ocean relatively far away, carving out a slightly larger pocket of localized safety. But on the southern side, the crushing, radioactive tide of the Milky Way is actively winning the war, forcefully shoving the dense, glowing sludge of the hydrogen wall much closer to the inner planets. The barrier is severely dented, caved in by the sheer, unfathomable kinetic pressure of the deep dark. We are not living inside a perfectly engineered bubble of static defense. We are surviving inside a heavily battered, structurally compromised pocket of space that is buckling and folding under the infinite weight of a completely hostile universe. It is a misshapen, bruised shield, taking a relentless beating from a galactic current that is violently pushing against us. But the true existential horror of this jagged asymmetry is not just its deformed, crushed shape. It is the terrifying realization that the invisible boundary of our world is not a frozen, static piece of architecture. It is not a solid wall of concrete permanently anchored in the void. It is a highly volatile, fluid, and fiercely active collision zone between two unimaginable cosmic forces. Because the Sun is a chaotic, violently fluctuating nuclear engine, its outward magnetic pressure constantly surges and wanes on an 11-year cycle. And because the interstellar medium is a raging, churning ocean of ancient plasma and galactic winds, the inward pressure from the deep void is never constant. Consequently, the invisible wall marking the edge of our reality is actively moving. It is trembling, it is breathing. The hyperdense barrier of trapped cosmic radiation and the tightly wound shroud of the galactic magnetic field are constantly shifting, violently expanding outward in moments of solar strength, and aggressively collapsing inward when the Sun weakens or the external pressure of the galaxy surges. The boundary of our world is literally pulsing like the chest cavity of a dying, desperate animal. When Voyager 1 crossed the threshold, it did not just pass through a static line in the sand. It navigated a violently shifting war zone where the wall itself was rolling back and forth across millions of miles of space. This means that the distance between humanity and the lethal, sterilizing radiation of the true vacuum is constantly changing. We are forced to confront the chilling, paralyzing reality that our entire solar system is encased within a collapsible cage. We are entirely at the mercy of invisible cosmic weather that we cannot control, cannot physically see, and cannot accurately predict. As our entire solar neighborhood hurtles through the Milky Way galaxy at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour, orbiting the supermassive black hole at the galactic center, we do not sail through a uniform, empty sea. The spiral arms of our galaxy are heavily saturated with vast, invisible clouds of hyperdense interstellar gas, the radioactive remnants of ancient supernovas, and towering, lethal dust lanes. If the Sun's trajectory were to blindly drag our solar system into one of these significantly denser regions of the galactic ocean, the inward, crushing pressure against the heliosphere would instantly, catastrophically multiply. The heavy, invisible wall that currently resides billions of miles away from the Earth would be violently shoved inward. The dense, pressurized barricade of the hydrogen wall and the lethal high-energy cosmic rays trapped within it would be forced dangerously close to the inner planets. The safe, localized microclimate that has allowed human biology to slowly evolve and flourish over millions of years would rapidly, violently shrink. If we pass through a dense enough interstellar cloud, the breathing wall of our quarantine zone could potentially collapse inward past the orbits of the outer planets, exposing the gas giants and potentially even the inner rocky worlds to the raw, unfiltered fury of the galactic wind. The invisible boundary is not a permanent guarantee of safety. It is a temporary, highly volatile standoff. The exact size of our localized reality is a terrifyingly elastic variable, entirely dependent on the chaotic whims of a universe that does not even register our existence. We have built our entire human civilization, our grand philosophical narratives, and our false sense of cosmic security under the desperate assumption that the heavens are stable. We look at the planets in their predictable, clockwork orbits, and we arrogantly assume that the overarching structure of our reality is equally permanent. We believe that the house we live in is built on an unshakable foundation, but the violently asymmetrical, breathing wall of the heliosphere proves that our existence is precariously balanced on the edge of a razor. We are microscopic biological anomalies trapped inside a shivering, deformed, and collapsible membrane of magnetic tension, floating blindly through an ocean of radioactive fire. The cage we live in is constantly shifting its weight, violently buckling under the pressure of the infinite dark. Every single day, the invisible wall breathes in and out, silently threatening to close the distance and drown our fragile, localized world in the raw, sterilizing chaos of the deep cosmos. We are not the masters of our domain. We are deeply vulnerable prisoners sitting inside a contracting cell, hopelessly hoping that the walls do not finally cave in. To completely immerse ourselves in the paralyzing psychological terror of the cosmic quarantine zone, we must confront the most primal, deeply ingrained sensory illusion that human beings possess regarding the universe: the absolute, unbroken silence of deep space. From the moment we first conceptualized the void beyond our atmosphere, we have comforted ourselves with the mathematical certainty that a vacuum cannot carry acoustic waves. On Earth, we rely entirely on the dense physical medium of the air to transmit the vibrating kinetic energy that our biological ears interpret as sound. It is our fundamental warning system, an evolutionary mechanism designed to alert us to the unseen predators lurking in the dark. But we look up at the violent, apocalyptic machinery of the cosmos, the violently detonating supernovas, the crushing gravitational collisions of black holes, and the roaring, superheated plasma of dying stars, and we take immense psychological refuge in the belief that this spectacular violence is entirely mute. We imagine the universe as a silent, majestic theater, a chaotic but peaceful pantomime playing out behind an impenetrable pane of soundproof glass. We believe that because there is no breathable air in space, the abyss cannot possibly speak to us. But this comforting assumption is a spectacularly localized biological lie. The universe is not silent, and the terrifying boundary that Voyager just violently breached has forced humanity to listen to the true, deafening reality of the deep dark. As the battered, freezing metal chassis of Voyager, one physically punched through the hyper-dense, glowing sludge of the hydrogen wall and became hopelessly tangled in the suffocating magnetic shroud of the Milky Way. Its archaic instruments were not just measuring temperature and particle density. Deep within the primitive silicon architecture of the spacecraft, a highly sensitive piece of equipment known as the plasma wave subsystem was actively listening. For decades, while the probe was safely sailing inside the pressurized, localized bubble of the heliosphere, this instrument had recorded the chaotic, violent, and deafeningly loud eruptions of our own Sunday. It listened to the explosive shockwaves of solar flares crashing through the thin solar wind, generating massive, temporary bursts of erratic electromagnetic noise. These were the loud, unpredictable sounds of our localized, violent neighborhood. The scientists on Earth naturally assumed that once the dying spacecraft finally crossed the absolute boundary of our world and entered the true, undisturbed vacuum of interstellar space, those chaotic solar eruptions would violently fade away, leaving behind a cold, absolute, and eternal silence. They expected the instrument to register nothing but the dead, flatline zero of an empty, frictionless ocean. But the universe refused to be silenced. Months after the violent transition into the interstellar medium, when the chaotic, crashing shockwaves of our dying solar wind had finally faded into the background, the analysts staring at the data streams in the brightly lit mission control rooms noticed something deeply, profoundly unsettling. The Deep Space Network was not receiving a flat line. The raw data bleeding back from the absolute edge of our reality contained a signal. It was not a sudden, violent burst of erratic energy, nor was it the temporary, chaotic electromagnetic interference of a distant dying star. It was a constant, incredibly faint, and deeply eerie low-frequency emission. It was a persistent, unbroken drone vibrating through the ancient, freezing dark. Voyager was detecting a hum. This was not a mechanical glitch inside the aging, freezing circuitry of the spacecraft. It was not a localized error or a misinterpretation of thermal noise. The relentless, narrow-band frequency was the literal physical sound of the true universe. To understand how the vacuum can actively generate a sound, we must remember the terrifying reality of the density spike. The interstellar medium is not an empty void. It is a hyperdense, intensely pressurized ocean of ancient charged plasma. While it completely lacks the breathable oxygen of our localized atmosphere, this thick cosmic sludge is heavily saturated with vibrating electrons and primordial ionized gas. When the massive, invisible architecture of the galactic magnetic field actively squeezes and churns this plasma, it generates faint, relentless physical waves that ripple through the deep dark. The continuous, low-frequency hum that Voyager is currently detecting is the physical, mechanical vibration of the Milky Way galaxy itself. It is the literal acoustic manifestation of the interstellar ocean. The existential dread inflicted by this discovery is completely suffocating. For billions of years, we have been safely locked inside the deafening, chaotic noise of our own pressurized solar bubble, completely oblivious to the ambient sound of the abyss that surrounds us. We thought we were living in a quiet neighborhood, but we were actually sitting inside a soundproof quarantine chamber, entirely cut off from the true acoustic reality of the cosmos. Now that our mechanical scout has violently breached the wall, we are finally hearing the background noise of the universe for the very first time, and the sound is not majestic. It is not a beautiful, complex celestial symphony orchestrated by a benevolent creator. It is a monotonous, relentless, and deeply apathetic drone. It is a low, vibrating hum that has been echoing continuously through the freezing dark since the dawn of time, completely unchanged and completely indifferent to the agonizingly short, fragile history of human civilization. When you deeply internalize the nature of this sound, it fundamentally shatters the romanticized, arrogant narrative of human space exploration. Strapped to the side of Voyager is a golden phonograph record, meticulously etched with the carefully curated sounds of the Earth. We proudly sent the gentle crashing of ocean waves, the complex, beautiful mathematics of classical music, the sound of a mother's heartbeat, and spoken greetings in dozens of human languages out into the dark. It was a desperate, hopeful attempt to speak to the cosmos, a plea to the universe to recognize our existence, our intelligence, and our vibrant biological warmth. We shouted our identity into the void, desperately hoping for a reply. But the interstellar hum is the terrifying, ultimate answer. The universe is not listening to our golden record. The universe does not care about our music, our biology, or our desperate evolutionary need for connection. The universe is simply humming its own dead, ancient frequency, a relentless, mechanical vibration that will effortlessly outlast the existence of our planet, our star, and every single memory our species has ever forged. We are being forced to confront the chilling realization that the environment immediately outside our solar system is a heavily pressurized, incredibly dense ocean of radioactive plasma that vibrates with a constant, uncaring drone. The hum is the sound of the invisible wall that keeps us trapped. It is the ambient noise of the heavy, suffocating magnetic shroud that is actively crushing against the absolute edge of our localized reality. As the dying, freezing chassis of Voyager continues to drag itself blindly into this dense, hostile medium, the interstellar hum is the only thing it will ever hear again. It will never hear the chaotic, familiar eruptions of the sun, and it will never hear the voices of the civilization that built it. It is permanently immersed in the relentless, low-frequency vibration of a galactic ocean that fundamentally does not register our existence and will not mourn our eventual passing. When we look up at the night sky now, we can no longer take refuge in the illusion of a silent, peaceful canopy. We know the terrifying truth. The darkness between the stars is heavily saturated with a crushing physical weight, and it is vibrating with a continuous, ancient frequency. The void is an active, heavy, and relentlessly apathetic machine, constantly humming its low, droning song right outside the shivering, invisible walls of our cosmic cage. We are microscopic prisoners sitting in the dark, desperately holding our breath, listening to the vast, crushing weight of the true universe continuously vibrating just beyond the closed door of our quarantined world, entirely powerless to silence the deafening roar of the abyss. For centuries, human civilization has been entirely fueled by a singular, intoxicating delusion. We look up at the sprawling, diamond-dusted canopy of the night sky and deeply, fundamentally believe that it belongs to us. We have woven the concept of interstellar expansion into the very fabric of our species' identity. We tell ourselves grand, romantic stories about building colossal, gleaming generation ships, conquering the vast distances of the deep dark, and eventually taking our rightful place among the distant, burning stars of the Milky Way. We view the Earth not as a permanent residence, but merely as a temporary biological cradle, a starting line from which we will inevitably launch our grand, cosmic empire. We arrogant, fragile apes have convinced ourselves that the universe is an open door, a boundless, empty frontier just patiently waiting for us to figure out the mathematics of faster-than-light travel. But the terrifying empirical data bleeding back from the archaic sensors of Voyager violently annihilates this beautiful, comforting hallucination. The discovery of the plasma density spike, the crushing weight of the hydrogen wall, and the suffocating tension of the magnetic shroud forces us to confront an apocalyptic, existential conclusion. The boundary of our solar system is not a gateway. It is a heavily fortified, impassable barricade. We are not brave explorers waiting in the wings of a grand cosmic stage. We are inmates. To understand the sheer, insurmountable horror of this reality, we must look at the brutal, unforgiving physics of attempting to push a human being through the invisible wall. In our science fiction fantasies, we imagine sleek, heavily armored vessels effortlessly piercing the edge of the solar system and slipping quietly into the void. But the empirical truth is that leaving the localized bubble of the heliosphere is an act of spectacular physical violence. The absolute boundary of our world is a hyper-compressed, intensely pressurized collision zone, thick with ancient, lethally charged plasma and the radioactive shrapnel of violently detonated supernovas. If we were to ever construct a manned spacecraft capable of reaching the outer limits of the solar system, the exact moment it attempted to cross the heliopause, it would not find a frictionless vacuum. It would violently smash into a dense, crushing wall of cosmic debris. The sheer kinetic friction of dragging a physical, manufactured hull through the heavily saturated sludge of the hydrogen wall would be utterly catastrophic. The vessel would be physically ground down, violently shaken, and aggressively crushed by the immense, opposing weight of the entire Milky Way galaxy pushing back against our localized reality. But even if our engineers could somehow design a hull capable of withstanding the immense mechanical pressure of the interstellar medium, the biological cargo inside would be flawlessly, instantly eradicated. The magnetic shroud wrapping our solar system is a graveyard of high-energy cosmic rays, trapped and churning in a localized hurricane of raw atomic fire. The instant a human vessel breached the protective, outward breath of the sun, the fragile, carbon-based organisms inside would be subjected to a lethal, sterilizing flood of galactic radiation. There is no lead shielding thick enough, no localized magnetic deflector powerful enough to protect the incredibly delicate, microscopically precise machinery of human DNA from the apex predators of the deep void. The ambient, baseline energy of the true universe is fundamentally incompatible with the highly specific, incredibly fragile conditions required for biological life. The boundary is not just a physical wall, it is a perfectly engineered sterilization zone, an absolute, unforgiving filter that mathematically guarantees nothing biological can ever cross the threshold and survive. This inescapable physical reality forces us to entertain a philosophical nightmare so profoundly dark that it threatens to break the collective human spirit. What if the crushing, heavily shielded boundary of our solar system is not simply a random, chaotic accident of galactic fluid dynamics? What if the universe naturally, actively quarantines biological life? We look at the chaotic, roaring, radioactive machinery of the cosmos, the dying stars, the crushing black holes, the sterilizing gamma-ray bursts, and we realize that biological life is a bizarre, microscopic anomaly. We are an incredibly fragile, incredibly rare, localized infection in a universe defined by raw, inorganic violence. Perhaps the architecture of the cosmos naturally isolates these localized biological outbreaks. The massive magnetic bubbles generated by stable stars like our Sun serve as perfect, pressurized quarantine wards, allowing the delicate chemistry of life to briefly spark and evolve in total isolation, safely segregated from the raging, hostile currents of the true galaxy. The universe permits us to exist, but only on the strict, non-negotiable condition that we never, ever leave the cell. We are forced to look at our own solar system through a terrifying, claustrophobic new lens. The Earth, with its sprawling oceans, its towering mountains, and its vibrant, breathable atmosphere, is not a majestic, open world. It is simply the padded cell at the very center of the prison. The other planets in our localized neighborhood, the rusting, dead deserts of Mars, the crushing, toxic atmospheric storms of Venus, and the swirling, radioactive gas giants of Jupiter and Saturn are not stepping stones to a wider galactic empire. They are simply the other, slightly more hostile corners of the exact same locked room. We can send our mechanical rovers to scratch at the dirt of these neighboring rocks, and we might even one day send a human being to leave a boot print on the freezing, dead dust of the Martian surface. We will proudly declare it a monumental triumph of the human spirit, a giant leap for our species. But in the grand, terrifying architecture of the cosmos, we will have accomplished absolutely nothing. We will have simply paced from one side of our heavily barricaded cell to the other, still hopelessly, permanently trapped billions of miles away from the true, invisible wall that marks the absolute limit of our existence. The dream of interstellar travel is a biological delusion, a desperate psychological coping mechanism designed by our fragile brains to hide the paralyzing reality of our absolute containment. The physical difficulty of pushing a manned spacecraft through the dense, highly radioactive, and magnetically draped boundary of our world makes true exploration a physical, mathematical impossibility. The wall is too thick, The ocean outside is too violent, and our biological hardware is far too incredibly fragile. We are entirely marooned on a microscopic rock, circling a violently unstable, ticking time bomb of a star, hopelessly enveloped in a suffocating shroud of cosmic tension. We will never see the swirling, majestic dust lanes of the Andromeda Galaxy up close. We will never mine the crushing, hyperdense cores of dead neutron stars, and we will never establish a thriving, interconnected civilization across the sprawling arms of the Milky Way. The grand, sweeping narrative of human destiny violently and abruptly ends right here, at the invisible, crushing barricade of the heliopause. The profound, existential dread of this realization is completely suffocating. It violently strips away all the romantic majesty of the night sky and aggressively reduces it to the mocking, distant glow of a reality we are permanently forbidden from entering. When you look up at the stars tonight, you are not looking at a map of our future. You are staring directly at the thick, heavy, and completely impassable bars of our cage. The universe has meticulously locked us inside a colossal cosmic prison, heavily disguised as a home, completely cutting us off from the roaring, apathetic abyss. We are a quarantined species, permanently sentenced to live out the entire, meaningless span of our evolutionary history in the dark, entirely alone, frantically building our primitive rockets and dreaming our grand, pathetic dreams of escape. We are completely unaware that the door was heavily, permanently bolted shut from the outside billions of years before we were even born, trapping us inside a terrifying, beautifully illuminated solitary confinement cell for the rest of eternity. We have finally reached the end of this terrifying cosmic descent. Throughout this journey, we have systematically torn down the comforting, biological illusions that have shielded human sanity since the dawn of our species. We looked up at the night sky and arrogantly painted a majestic, boundless frontier, a quiet and frictionless ocean of infinite possibility just waiting for our grand arrival. But the empirical data, blindly transmitted back to Earth by a fragile, aging metal box billions of miles away, has violently shattered that dream. Voyager proved, with cold, mathematical certainty, that our solar system is not an open harbor. It is a finite, claustrophobic, and heavily fortified bubble, violently panting and shivering in the middle of a hostile, crushing interstellar ocean. We have mapped the dense, glowing sludge of the hydrogen wall. We have felt the suffocating, inward tension of the magnetic shroud, and we have listened to the relentless, apathetic drone of the deep dark. We are not the masters of an open universe. We are microscopic, biological anomalies hopelessly quarantined inside a localized pocket of pressurized plasma, permanently separated from the true, raging reality of the cosmos by an invisible, solid wall of atomic fire. And what of the messenger that brought us this paralyzing truth? What is the ultimate fate of the fragile, spindly scout that sacrificed itself to map the bars of our cage? Voyager 1 is currently suspended in the freezing, hyperdense medium of the true vacuum, entirely alone in a darkness so absolute it defies human comprehension. It has pushed further into the abyss than any physical object ever crafted by human hands, but it is fundamentally a machine born of a bygone era. It is an archaic collection of Cold War-era aluminum, obsolete copper wiring, and primitive silicon, completely unequipped to survive the eternal, radioactive fury of the galactic ocean. It is dying. The lifeblood of Voyager is not sunlight. The sun has long since faded into just another distant, indistinguishable pinpoint of cold light in the rearview mirror. Its survival has relied entirely on the slow, radioactive decay of a tiny plutonium pellet encased deep within its chassis. For nearly half a century, the thermal energy radiating from this decaying nuclear heart has been meticulously managed, desperately routed to keep the probes delicate. Primitive instruments from freezing solid in the abyssal temperatures of deep space. But the laws of thermodynamics are absolute, and the plutonium is finally running out. The heat is fading. The electrical power is dropping to critically unsustainable levels. In the sterile, brightly lit mission control rooms back on Earth, engineers are currently engaged in a tragic, desperate triage, slowly turning off the spacecraft's scientific instruments one by one, sacrificing its senses just to buy a few more agonizing months of survival. Soon, the final heater will be violently commanded to shut down. The last remaining drops of thermal energy will rapidly bleed out into the freezing, hyperdense plasma of the interstellar medium. The internal temperature of the metal box will plummet, matching the apocalyptic cold of the deep dark. Its silicon brains will freeze. Its archaic, spinning gyroscopes will grind to a permanent halt. The faint, whispering radio signal that has tethered this brave little scout to humanity for billions of miles will finally, abruptly cut out, leaving behind nothing but the relentless, apathetic hum of the cosmic void. Voyager will go completely dark. It will cease to be a functioning explorer and instantly transform into a dead, metal ghost. Yet, even in its frozen death, Voyager will continue its terrifying, ballistic trajectory. It will be violently carried forward by its own momentum, dragging its dead chassis through the crushed cosmic debris of the Milky Way. And bolted to the side of this frozen ghost ship is a profoundly tragic artifact, the Golden Record. It is a meticulously etched phonograph, carrying the sounds of Earth's oceans, the complex mathematics of our music, and the spoken greetings of a vibrant, warm, biological world. We sent it out into the dark as a message of hope, a desperate plea for connection in what we thought was a welcoming, open universe. But knowing what we know now about the dense, crushing barricade of the hydrogen wall and the lethal, sterilizing radiation of the galactic ocean, the Golden Record takes on a deeply horrifying, melancholic new meaning. It is no longer a greeting card to the stars. It is the final, desperate testament of a trapped civilization. It is a message in a bottle thrown into a raging, radioactive ocean by prisoners who know they will never, ever be allowed to leave their island. As Voyager drifts silently through the deep unknown for millions, perhaps billions of years, it will effortlessly outlive the civilization that built it. Long after the Earth has been violently swallowed by the expanding death throes of our own sun, and long after the grand, tragic narrative of human history has been entirely erased from the cosmos, this dead metal ghost will still be floating out there in the freezing dark. It will be the only physical proof that we ever existed, carrying the frozen memories of a species that spent its entire existence looking up at the bars of its cage, dreaming of a universe it was permanently forbidden from touching. Imagine the sheer, unfathomable scale of the time this dead metal ghost will endure. It will silently coast through the heavily irradiated, hyperdense plasma of the galactic arm for tens of thousands of years before it even approaches the nearest neighboring star. But it will not stop there. It will continue to plunge deeper into the suffocating magnetic shroud of the Milky Way, slowly being bombarded and eroded by the exact same microscopic cosmic rays that it was designed to measure. Millions of years from now, the intricate grooves etched into the Golden Record, the grooves that hold the fragile, beautiful sounds of a baby crying, the laughter of humanity, and the delicate music of a world that no longer exists will be violently, subatomically sandblasted away by the relentless kinetic friction of the deep void. The universe will slowly, methodically erase our desperate message, aggressively scrubbing away the last remaining echo of our biological existence until the metal plate is completely smooth, entirely devoid of meaning, and completely assimilated into the dead, apathetic machinery of the cosmos. Voyager will become just another meaningless piece of cosmic debris, a forgotten, frozen anomaly drifting endlessly through an ocean that never cared it was there in the first place. We must now reconcile our daily existence with the terrifying reality of our cosmic quarantine. Every time you step outside, feel the warmth of the sun on your skin and look up at the sprawling canopy of the night sky, you must remember the massive, invisible architecture actively crushing down on the absolute edge of our reality. The stars you see are not destinations. They are distant fires burning on the other side of an impenetrable wall. We are completely isolated, tucked away in a tiny, pressurized pocket of space, entirely at the mercy of the violent, invisible forces raging just beyond our protective bubble. The universe is not an empty stage waiting for our arrival. It is a dense, highly saturated, and intensely hostile ocean that actively pushes back against our existence. We are marooned on this fragile, blue rock, permanently sentenced to live out our evolutionary timeline within the strict, unforgiving confines of the heliosphere, completely unable to breach the dense, glowing sludge of the true interstellar void. The chilling legacy of Voyager is not just the data it sent back, but the existential dread it leaves in its wake. It proved that the universe naturally quarantines biological life, sealing us safely and permanently inside a breathing, collapsible magnetic shroud. We are forced to look inward, to accept that our grandest ambitions of interstellar empire are nothing more than biological delusions. We are entirely bound to this specific star, to this specific fragile bubble, until the very end of time. Does the existence of this dense, invisible wall make you feel safely protected from the cosmic abyss, or does it make you feel like humanity is permanently trapped in a cage? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Good night, and I will see you in the next video here at Still Science Lab.